Hello, it's James. Before we start this episode, X has announced that it is going to stop Grok AI from undressing images of real people following a backlash. That does feel like one of those things that in a normal society, in a normal time of life, I wouldn't really have to point out, but there we go. That's it. So we recorded this episode before that was announced, but I think the episode itself still hangs up, and I hope you enjoy it right now. Hello and welcome to Can We Have Your Attention, the Attention Economy podcast hosted by myself, James Wickham. I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and joined always by Claire Coady. Hello,
Hi.
Claire.
Hello, James.
Founder of the Attention Practice and many other things besides. And Claire, before we get into the topic we need to talk about today, which is both very topical and very much about attention and the media and all sorts of things, let's talk about the thing that's been grabbing your attention for the last few weeks, because we discovered on our Christmas programme, if you heard that we have a mutual love of the NFL. Mm-hmm. What time were you up till the other night watching American
5
football?
a.m.
5 a.m. 5
a.m.
Good. Have you recovered?
Yes.
Okay.
No, sort of. I then stayed up last night as well to watch Eagles 49ers, which...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. And at some point, Claire, we need to talk about the NFL and its massive viewing figures. And
I want to do a Super Bowl special.
Oh yeah, let's do a Super Bowl special. I can play it to everyone at my party.
Yes.
That'll really excite them, won't it? Get the crowds going while they're drinking red wine. We'll move on from the NFL slightly and let's look at X and Grok and Ofcom and all the things that kind of appeared in the news recently. We're going to, at some point, aren't we, go into exactly how X, Elon Musk's social media company, makes its money. But shall I just bring you up to date with where we're up to at this point with this story? So Ofcom then, which is the UK's regulatory authority into the communications industry, has launched an investigation into X. This is over concerns that Grok, which is X's AI tool, is being used to create sexualized images. Now, if found to have broken the law, Ofcom can potentially issue X with a fine of up to 10% of its worldwide revenue, or £18 million, whichever is greater. Now, the BBC have tried to get in contact with X, and X referred them to a statement posted by its safety account at the start of January, which said anyone using or prompting Grok to make illegal content will suffer the same consequences as if they upload illegal content. So that's where we've got to. And before we go on to how they make money and also about, what this means for them, can I just ask you what you think reputationally this all means for X?
So I actually, this is a really difficult subject because I think people are treating X like any other social media company, right? They're treating them like Meta or like TikTok or, anything with that global scale. But the reality is X is a bit more like what 4chan was 15 years ago. And so in a way, the scandal around this might actually end up doing good things for them. It might actually help their position in the medium long term.
So can you explain, how do you mean? Because, on the very face of it, this just looks like they're coming in for a lot of criticism. And also, if you put it in the context of the last few months or indeed years, ever since it was taken over, there's been a very definite shift in the content provided on X.
Well, that's exactly the thing, right? So that shift in the content provided on X and their policies has resulted in a decline in users in their main markets, right? So UK, US, and EU for a variety of reasons. Mostly, there are some people who will have left over political objections, but for the many people who did leave, it just became a bit hard to be on. Like psychologically, it's quite hard to be on. It's a lot more abrasive. There's stuff on it you don't want to see. And, the reason that platforms like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok have restrictions in place within their algorithms to prevent surfacing of content like that is actually to avoid losing most mainstream users. X has made the opposite decision in an ideological pursuit, really, in the pursuit of free speech. But what that's meant is it's become a free-for-all, and as a result, users have dropped off. So the core of those users who are there are the exact people who think that politicians, the media, in quotes, government is oppressing or suppressing their ability to say things. So the fact that they're then being criticized by those same people actually, makes them feel like, one, that they're getting their message across weirdly, and two, that they're winning some sort of great battle. And as a result, like, I just don't think it will affect them in the same way. And I think as well, like anyone who had those specific concerns about X and were trying to exercise that through their role as a shareholder in Tesla, for example, I don't think those people are there anymore, right? Like, if it didn't bother them 6 months ago, it's not going to bother them now.
Yeah, we should say in terms of X and its position, around stock and stuff. I mean, the only one of Elon Musk's companies that are actually listed on any of the stock exchanges is Tesla,
Yeah,
right?
X is privately owned by.
Yeah, absolutely. So Twitter wasn't privately owned. Twitter was listed, and then under the purchase by Elon Musk, it was taken over and then brought into private hands.
Yeah.
Elon Musk's own hands, obviously. So, you've kind of gone into it a little bit, but what's the point for X of really going, okay, free speech, this is what we're going to go for? Do you think there is a reason for them saying we're not bothered about the mainstream? Because they must have known that these changes would alienate a large amount of the mainstream audience.
Oh, it's a terrible business. So to look at this as a business decision, like purely like just as for X as a platform, is not the right way to look at this. The same way it would have been for 4chan, right? So I remember, 15 years ago, 4chan, the same things we're saying about X right now are the same things that were said about 4chan at the time. And it was the same sort of user profile, same sort of engagement, same sort of things that would happen on the platform. For anyone who doesn't know 4chan refreshed every 3 hours. So its history was completely erased. It had no repository. So you couldn't cache anything from it. And as a result, whatever said, things moved at that lightning pace. And that's where memes were born. But that's also where things like revenge porn was circulated, and where plots basically to take down companies would happen by teenage boys. So these tiny group, relatively small group of people could exert a huge influence on companies, governments, et cetera, through the device 4chan. That's where X is at the moment, right? X is part vanity project, part personal political vehicle, and part ideological stand. That's what X is. It's not really a mainstream social media company in that sense.
Yeah. Now you come from a advertising background, of course.
Oh, and of course, sorry, it doesn't make money. Advertisers will issue it. So 4chan had all these users. No, they couldn't get advertisers for love or money, and the same thing's happening on X.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that I think, a lot of advertisers were quite loath to come off X, and then that exodus has kind of been increasing over time.
It's gone. So before X was X, it was Twitter. And Twitter for a long time also did struggle with getting advertisers at the same level as, say, Meta's Facebook or Instagram did, or YouTube, or, any of that.
And what was the reason for that? Is that the nature of the service itself?
It was partly the nature of the service. So one of the big reasons is that because there was so much content, there's so much going through it, it was hard to get a viable advertising product through that system. It moved so fast. The discourse moved so fast. Everything felt very ephemeral. The user base as well was difficult to pin down. So X now and Twitter then, same thing as before, you couldn't really identify who you were speaking to, even demographically, right? They couldn't really say where people were. They couldn't say who they were. They couldn't even say what gender, age, because that had to be user-provided information, and they just didn't have the data to guess. What they did know was interests. What they did know was what people engaged in. But advertisers don't buy on that basis. They buy on demographics, and still do, right? Despite, Meta or Facebook in its, early days really, really, really tried to fight the good fight to get advertisers to buy on the basis of interests. But they just said, look, you're talking about whole media plans that include television, that include radio, that include press, that include, and we make these plans on the basis of demographics. So you have to fit into us. And Twitter could never really fit into that. It just couldn't do it. Google was able to do it with YouTube as a result of how big its ecosystem was, having DoubleClick in there, being able to track users from site to site, then gave it enough information to make a reasonable guess about who its users were. Twitter didn't have that. So that was it really. Twitter couldn't make a viable advertising proposition that would allow it to have a very large number of advertisers buying at volume at quite small rates. And that's generally how social media advertising works.
But of course, Twitter was known as being the place that thinkers, your academics, your
News
journalists, all
happened.
these people, news
Yeah.
happened on Twitter.
Yeah.
And now it hasn't. But it was always a bit niche in that respect, wasn't it? But
It
but
was.
now it doesn't in the same way, or does it? Because of course it is definitely a platform, but for a different subsection of society.
Yeah. So I remember when I was working sort of as a mid-level, just moving into senior strategist about, 10, 15 years ago. And I remember telling people to ignore Twitter.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things that made Twitter really seductive if you were monitoring it, right? One is that because profiles are mostly public on Twitter, no one was really locked down. You could you could openly track information flowing through that platform. At least, the publicly stated tweets. You couldn't track DMs, but whatever. And you couldn't really do that successfully with Facebook because profiles are private. And the same with Instagram. You couldn't really see what people were saying. So if you were running, say, a chocolate brand, say you're running Cadbury, you could very easily say what a relatively small number of people were saying about you on Twitter, but you couldn't see what a vast number of people were saying about you on Facebook. So then Twitter would be used as a way of trying to determine what people thought about you, your brand, your topic, or the news. And I think for journalism in particular, that became where news was both made and broken. At some point, Twitter became news and news became Twitter. All to our detriment, I think we can finally agree. But that was because it felt like you didn't even have to leave your desk, right? Like you could just see what was happening, pick it up and run with it. But what you were seeing was a very small subsection of society. And often it was the same sort of people talking to each other, right? Journalists talking
Yeah.
to journalists, politicians talking to politicians. Ordinary people didn't really talk or engage on Twitter, even at its height.
I remember quite a lot of time when I was working in the BBC where I would have a Twitter page open. I had a Twitter page. I quite enjoyed using
Oh, I
Twitter, the
loved
old
it.
Twitter.
Yeah. I loved it in the early days.
But what I would say is that I was always pretty aware that, it was a very niche audience. So it was brilliant for getting news. And it was also really good if I needed to for getting hold of people at strange times of day. So,
Yes.
I often, because I worked on the overnight shift, so I would often have to contact academics in America in the early evening for them. So they would have left their establishments for the day and then would be, at home, and in that way it was fantastic because I could just message them on Twitter and get hold of them. So it made journalism really easy, but you did have to be really aware that it was very much a niche audience. Now, that said, there's obviously been changes in that time, hasn't there? Since old Twitter to new Twitter in terms of the algorithms
Yes.
which they use. So shall we talk a bit about algorithms and how they work?
Yes. So I think it's worth going back way to the beginning of social media, right? So let's start with, let's start from the point of Facebook being founded.
Okay.
Right? Facebook came before Twitter. I think it's worth remembering.
Do we know what kind of dates we're talking about here? Is this early 2000s, mid 2000s?
Early mid 2000s, right? So
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact date Facebook was founded. I think it was 2004, 2005, but that, Harvard campuses and then expanding generally and gradually, right? So around that period, Twitter, I believe, was 2007, but I could be wrong. But anyway, the main thing is that originally they didn't really have algorithms. You just had networks, right? So you would join, you would connect with people, and then your feed would be filled by whatever people were saying with the most recent thing at the top. And that's how things ran for a few years, right? A couple of users on Twitter, or one user in particular on Twitter, introduced the concept of the hashtag to help try to organize conversations because already they realized that there was a problem with you being able to lose the thread of conversations, right? So already problems with that. So various things were introduced to mitigate that. But over time, as user growth sort of started to, let's say, slow, and the focus switched from those early stages to looking at investors and then gradually looking into IPOs, initial public offerings, I should say. There was a change in figuring out how to keep users on the platform. So user retention. Nobody wanted to be MySpace. So for anyone who isn't aware, there was a platform before all of this called MySpace.
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 Hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom. Everyone was friends with Tom. And you had these pages that you could personalize, and you would connect with your friends, and you'd have top fives. And it was kind of brutal and also kind of lovely. But MySpace lived and died really relatively quickly. And people were really concerned. People who worked at companies like Facebook and like Twitter were concerned about being able to maintain those users. They knew that part of it was how quickly they were able to steal users from MySpace and get them over. But then the process became, how do you retain them? And they realized that the time-based version of feeds didn't work anymore, right? Like, so Facebook introduced something called EdgeRank, which tried to then do, okay, time versus, and then it included something that was like a weight of your strength to that connection, that person. And then they scrapped that all together in 2011 and went, right, we're not going to tell you what's in the algorithm. We're just going to tell you there is one. And that algorithm is going to be based on a variety of things, but that's going to determine the user experience. And what it really means is this is the product for users, right? The whole product is this algorithm, and the algorithm, we will maintain it, we will tweak it, we will do what we can to make sure that the experience every time you come into it is as fresh and entertaining and or interesting as possible, in order to keep you on here for as long as possible and expand that amount of time that you spend on here.
Yeah, because it was really crucial that they changed the way it works,
Yeah.
because there were companies, not least MySpace, but Bebo, Friends Reunited.
Yeah.
There were quite a lot of social media companies that people were invested
Have
in,
a
and then they
hotel if
died.
you're, a little kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other funny thing was that nobody really knew how to deal with this new era of social media. I mean, of course, famously, ITV bought Friends Reunited.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
then
Oh,
it
God,
died, right? So,
Just,
one of the worst purchases ever in corporate history.
I
But
don't want to laugh.
yeah, I know it was terrible. But then at the time, lots of people thought it was a great idea, because suddenly ITV was expanding into a different realm,
Yeah.
such as the nature of these things. So therefore, they changed their algorithm. They came up with something new. We don't know exactly what it is, and it's always been kept a bit secret since then,
Well, I
right?
think the dirty secret is they don't actually know what's in it. So here's what happened. They introduced this algorithm, bunch of stuff in there, but basically what it was weighting was not just your connections and time and type of content, but it was also weighting subject matter and trying to gauge your interest in various topics. And this was also because they realized there's other things you might be interested in other than your friends. Maybe it's news, maybe it's fashion, maybe it's whatever. And they were trying to kind of guess how that goes. But we talked in previous episodes about how few employees these companies had at the time, and how much they were under pressure to grow user numbers, retention, et cetera. And so a lot of decisions were made, often on a daily or every couple days basis, to send it, right? Meaning to make a change and ship it. And I think documentation was probably relatively poor about what those changes were, because the focus was on just building on it. But then every change was really a tactical adjustment to the algorithm. And when they would do it, they weren't really sure what would happen to the rest of it. It was kind of an experiment, and it still is. So the answer is actually nobody really knows what's in the algorithm. Even the companies themselves don't really know how it works. They don't really know exactly what's pummeling it. They just know that they can see the algorithm today. They can see how users are interacting. They can see where there's problems, and they fix it. So it's a bit like having an old car where everything, something goes
Yeah.
wrong a little bit every day, and you sort of tweak it. But one day
Something falls over properly.
it might not. Yeah.
You don't believe there's any sense that these companies have a plan?
I
Like, there's
100% do not believe they have a plan. Yeah.
right. So there's no overriding kind of big plan. This is what we're going to do.
Nope.
All they are doing, basically, all these massive amounts of data engineers and so on, are just constant algorithmic tweaks.
Algorithmic tweaks to retain users in order to make money from advertisers. Yes, that's it. That's it.
That's
There's
what
no
it
grand
is.
plan. It's quarter to quarter. Make sure we maintain our share price. How do we do that? Keep users on the platforms for longer. We do that because it retains advertisers.
So why are people so obsessed with these companies then, when they don't have a plan, when they don't have a grand overall scheme? Is it just that the only way for people to feel that they're getting really good quality eyes on something is to put it on social media with a company like Facebook?
So I think there's two things. One is that the first one, I think, is that it's easy to look at Facebook, Instagram, at YouTube, at any X, right? And see content and then think that's a media company. And try to associate it in your mind with like an ITV or a Paramount or a Netflix. They're not. These companies don't make anything. They don't make anything. They don't make content. They're not creative. So they don't have a vision for what information and entertainment looks like. That's not their bag. They are not communications companies. These are technology companies, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, they don't really have a vision of what they're meant to be. So if you think about like Channel 4, for example, at its founding, it was like, right, we're going to be this alternative. We're going to say things differently. We're going to be the voice that holds the media standard to account so that we can all better hold society to account, right? And also we're gonna make something that's fun and cool and push the edges of creativity, right? That's a vision. I don't think I've ever seen anything that comes out of Facebook that's genuinely a vision. They sometimes say things like everyone in the world is connected to Facebook, or you can connect to that. Those are like marketing statements. That's not a vision of what the role of social media is or what the role of a platform like Facebook is in society. Sometimes I've seen briefs where they've briefed that out to advertising agencies to try to solve that for them. Most famously, I think in 2012, Wyden and Kennedy, you can probably search for this now. They made an ad with an Oscar-winning film director, and the ad is called Chairs. And it's beautifully, beautifully produced piece of advertising. I think probably one of the most expensive ads made that year. And that was the year of the Olympics. And it is utter nonsense. It is nonsense. It's trying to say that Facebook is like chairs. I can't remember exactly how this logic worked. I think it's the product of potentially some stimulants and
Allegedly, some stimulants, including coffee and lots of
yes, coffee,
legal things.
so much coffee, and Wyden and Kennedy as well, I should say, are and at the time were one of the world's best advertising agencies. They're best known for the history of Nike. They are Nike's advertising agency, right? So, so they're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And at the time, they were at their best. So there will have been people who went in and went, "This is going to be," and it looks beautiful. It is nonsense, utter nonsense. They are not Channel 4. They are not The Guardian. They are not the BBC. They are not ITV. They are not even GB News. Right? GB News has a vision. Like, these companies don't have visions.
Yeah. So there's no vision. There's no grand plan.
No.
But yet everybody is funneling money into them constantly.
Because there's so many people. So many
people.
Yeah. That's the value of attention.
But that said, I don't know if you feel like we've got to this stage now, but I know my social media kind of usage has dropped drastically in the last couple of years. I go on Facebook, and this may be an age thing, who knows, but I go on Facebook and lots of my friends are no longer posting on Facebook. They've no longer got accounts. Obviously, Twitter has gone the same way. And you see certain other ones, you see things like LinkedIn, of course, but that's a very different niche, I would say, specifically business related. So are people getting a bit sick of social media?
I mean, they're not getting sick of socializing, which I think we should remember was the original attraction of these companies, right? Was you could connect with your friends. So nobody's getting sick of that, right? But they're getting sick of what social media has become. So Adam Mosseri, who's Instagram's, I think he's their chief product officer. Anyway, he put out some posts the other week and someone shared them with me. And I did this thing where I just put my head in my hands and I was like, stating the obvious. And it annoyed me so much because he was saying things like, oh, it's no longer on the platforms. It's all in the DMs. I'm like, dude, it's always been in the DMs. That's why you own WhatsApp too, right? Like, this is not new. But the problem, of course, is that what he's trying to justify is why people are engaging less directly with the public posts by brands, by advertisers, by marketers on platforms like Instagram, why they can't get that further out. It's like, oh, it's all happening in the DMs. So just trust us. People are talking about you in there. What the algorithm pumps up and how it tries to engage you is very annoying. And the way that it's engineered at the moment is it's looking for tiny, tiny signals. And those signals are often wrong, right? So if you watch a reel on Instagram, it's like, oh, you must have loved that. And it will just give you more of that, irrespective of whether you actually liked it or not, because they can't now see that as an indication of whether it's good or not. People have twigged that liking, resharing, etc. But that's a metric that works. So they're just using even just passive engagement as that, but it's making the user experience really difficult. So,
but then how much of this is actually the case that people are getting fed up with social media, and how much of it is down to the fact that we get bored with a particular type of social media And over time, that needs to change. I mean, you've seen the diversification now, haven't you? From, just take Meta as an example, as you said. It started with Facebook. It feels to me like Instagram is a much bigger thing now. And of course, they've got WhatsApp as well, which you can either argue is a messaging platform or a social media, depending on what you use it for.
I think they would love to say it's social media because that way they can advertise.
But it's, to me, it's interesting that they have obviously decided that they need to diversify because people are getting bored with certain things, and then it changes. And then, of course, you've got somewhere like TikTok, which obviously completely different, again, different generation who didn't want to be involved in the kind of old fuddy-duddy stuff of Facebook and are now on TikTok. Do you think in like 3 or 4 years again there'll be another new one which will only be 3 seconds a reel or something?
Oh my God. I mean, that's the worst possibility on the planet. Because, in advertising, you often get told that you have to land this in the first 3 seconds or the first 2 seconds. And I'm increasingly worried it's becoming nanoseconds we're supposed to land things in.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible though, isn't it?
It's possible, but I know it is, but I just don't want to encourage people who to think flexibly about that. Okay, here's the thing. I firmly and have always believed that media itself isn't social, that people are social. That's it. So calling media social media, it was a good shorthand way of trying to explain that this is where people connect with people they like, but it's massively outgrown and surpassed that term, right? It's not really social. It's not. But the way it grew was because people are social. People have a natural instinct to socialize, and that's what they do. And as far back as, every major invention that we as humans have done has been used to socialize, right? We've immediately used it to communicate with each other. And then the next thing we've immediately done is use it to make misinformation. So I think that the printing press, we made a Gutenberg Bible, and then we also made a bunch of pamphlets accusing people of witchcraft. This is as old as time, right?
Yeah.
The fire, whatever we've seen to turn our hand to, we've managed to both use it to communicate with other people and then to make some sort of epic disaster out of it. And that it's not a surprise that this has happened too, right? So that's one thing to bear in mind, is that I think that social media, maybe as we know it, might not have the lifespan we think it will, because I think not because people will stop using it altogether. I think that's, even in its dwindling days, there were people who still used Friends Reunited. I think that there will be an increasing struggle to make it viable and profitable, because the things that advertisers turn to it for, the things that make it reassuring to advertisers that this is a good, safe bet to place your money to reach people, will get increasingly hard to justify, as they cannot track or predict meaning behind people's behavior on the platforms.
From an advertising point of view, are we very much looking at the case now where people are questioning that spend? I mean, we are in an economy which is, certainly in the UK, is not booming as well. So there is increased restriction on spend. Do you think people are getting to the point where they just don't think advertising is effective? I mean, not only on social media, but, generally it's much harder to get bang for your buck when it comes to advertising.
So first of all, I think there's always been skepticism of advertising. And I don't think that's new. I think it's harder to counter today. I think there was a general belief that, one of the gifts and curses of online and digital media and social media is that it gave you numbers. And those numbers were incredibly seductive, and they gave you them quickly. So as a result, people, particularly anyone holding purse strings like CFOs, felt more confident, or at least a little bit more confident, in the investment in social media and online media for advertising. It also opened the door for others to advertise who would not have had access to this, right? So small and medium businesses, that makes up the vast majority of Meta's revenue, right? The vast majority of that, we talked about this in an earlier episode, right? Like 99% of Meta's revenue comes from advertising spend.
Yeah.
The vast majority of that revenue comes from small and medium-sized enterprises. It is not coming from big advertisers. Big advertisers do struggle as a whole to defend advertising budgets, and have done for probably coming up to 20 years. Partially because of increased demand to demonstrate payback. It's very hard to demonstrate short-term payback and what you might do to get short-term payback might not be what is for the benefits the long-term health of the brand. So balancing that is very tricky. And like, let's face it, like CFOs, they're not marketing people. They don't have time for that. They don't have time for your nonsense, but also people have been less trained, right? So you have this soup where what is needed to justify that spend has not kept pace with the demands of the people who are trying to maximize margin, because ultimately, like, everyone is under pressure from a variety of quarters. And the last thing you need is to know that your marketing budget went wrong, right?
And look, there are companies we know about. You know, I was thinking the other day there was an interview with Michael O'Leary, who runs Ryanair in the FT, in which he spoke about the fact that their advertising budget is minuscule in proportion to the other so-called budget airlines, and yet people take their flights because they are cheaper. So there are times where advertising maybe doesn't work in the same way. That said, where do you think this is all going to end up, Claire, in terms of, we started talking about X and we started talking about Grok and all of these things that are going on at the moment? Are we just going to see a massive polarization of what remains of social media at the moment? And then do we think we're going to get a diffusing of society as a result of
I think we're going to struggle to see. So right now, no one is really questioning, and I think with good reason, they're not really questioning, how they spend money on Facebook or on Instagram or YouTube, if they do, right? It's generally seen as good bet. And in fact, the spend is increasing in those, for those platforms generally. But I think that it will get hard to justify over time because they can see the changes that are being made. They can see, that there's increasing pressure. And I think the main thing we haven't really talked about is that in order to spend money on advertising, you generally have to have money coming from somewhere else. And if you're losing money in increased costs of doing business, for example, tariffs, you have less money to spend overall on attracting users. And there you go. So
yeah, there's a circular economy there, right?
I think that we had a good few years of having a few major platforms that dominated things. I don't know whether that's sustainable long term, especially as, let's face it, the world is fragmenting, right? Like, all of this worked in a globalized world where everyone was sticking to a kind of similar rule book, and you could have global platforms with the exception of China. But today, I think that's going to get harder and harder, especially as, we're starting to have serious questions about and good questions, I think, about what is the role of online discourse in public life and protection. How do you balance things like speech versus harm? What constitutes breaking the law? These tensions exist. And I think it's going to get harder for social media companies and companies generally to adhere to frameworks that are both stricter and also more patchwork.
So just to finish off then, Claire, let's go back to where we started. We started talking about X and we started talking about Grok, as you've just been mentioning.
Yeah.
Why is X so special? What is it about that platform which makes it different to all the others?
First of all, X is not publicly listed and has no intention of being publicly listed. It is a vanity project run by Elon Musk. So it doesn't have the same responsiveness to shareholder concerns or public demand or advertisers, because definitely not advertisers, that other media and social media companies have, right? So all those rules about whether public pressure can affect this don't apply. And in fact, the opposite applies, because what Elon Musk has done is bet on people who actually are anti-authority and, anti-status quo. So the more the status quo shouts at them, the more they have ammunition that this is a problem. The other issue, I think, is the way that the argument is being constructed, right? This investigation is being opened, as we said, under the Online Safety Act because of specific concerns about child sexualized imagery. If they are found to be in breach of that, that is a clear violation of UK law. Fine. The problem is that the way the public discourse is being constructed has nothing to do with breaking the law. It has everything to do with, and this is where it gets tricky, more like bullying and harassment and sexual harassment, right? And I'm not saying that that's tricky, because that's awful, right? I mean, personally, like, I hate that that's what happens online. I hate that. And I hate that if you're a woman online, you have to basically just go, okay, you know what? This is the cost of having a voice. But that being said, that's not breaking the law, really. Like, it's not. It's a problem. It's a massive problem. Now, most companies like Anthropic, who run Claude AI, Open AI, who run ChatGPT, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Google, YouTube, even adults, even like Pornhub, right? Prevent you doing certain searches and running certain content, not just because it's a legal thing, but it's actually a policy decision by these companies because they're trying to reconcile the competing demands of their users. They care that their users feel good using the platform, and they care that they also have something to say and are able to explore it. And finding that middle ground is a really tricky thing to do. And most companies do that on the basis of what serves its users best, but also serves what it believes is its general culture. Fine. Grok AI and X are a very extreme end of this. And as a result, are willing to say, you know what, we don't care because we're not Anthropic. We are not OpenAI. We are not Meta. We are not going to make that decision. And to a degree, Ofcom unfortunately, has very limited ability to execute this. Now, they do have the ability to find them. They can ban them in the UK. But one of the flip sides of this, of course, is that this has become really about free speech, right? So what is free speech? Because it has been about adults and, what's offensive, what isn't. It's drawn attention to the platform. So Elon Musk can show that he will show this as an increase in demand for the platform. He will show this as a good thing, that those increase in what he calls user seconds is it's because people really want X. And obviously it has nothing to do with that. People are going there because they're curious. But Nigel Farage is now using this as a way to say that the UK government is suppressing free speech in the name of bikinis. And that is where my concern about it backfiring comes in. Because, okay, say we ban it and then say Nigel Farage is prime minister in a few years. What's the first thing he's going to bring back? It will become like state media. There's my concern is it becomes a rallying cry and a rallying platform for people who feel that they're oppressed by the status quo, by the media, by the government, by, that they can't say what they think. This is already an issue coming up. And it will, I think 2026 is going to be the year in the UK where this skyrockets and it's going to get nasty and dirty. And I fear that the starting point is going to be this, and we're not seeing the consequences of this action because effectively, I think for good reasons, for understandable and desirable reasons, this, what is a very personal campaign has been run, but the outcome of this is going to be hard to manage.
That is absolutely fascinating, Claire, and slightly worrying, to say the least.
I'm sorry, every episode ends on a bad note.
No, it's fine. No, look, it's interesting and it's worrying, and there's lots of things to discover, and all we can do is watch and see it happen. So that is what we'll do. We'll keep an eye on it. In the meantime, we'll see you next week with another episode of Can We Have Your Attention? Something else, all about the attention economy. Claire, thank you very much.
Thank you, James.